right. Last time we got together, we just had gotten into the next portion of this uh, PowerPoint I had put together. We'd gone through, just as a way of reminder, uh, go all the way back here, determined that there were a number of topics that I thought would be good to kick the class off with. And unfortunately, we did lose a couple of weeks, so we're going to have to try to catch up if we can. But we've already taken a look at what's going on with Israel. And if you're paying attention to the news, I don't know how many have Amir Sarfati's uh, the Telegram thing. He keeps us really up to date and probably more than we can even watch. But things right now, and I'll tell you, from my perspective, things are going well over there. There's a lot of miraculous events in terms of how they've been able to handle Hamas, how they're handling Hezbollah. Unfortunately, our administration continues to seemingly sabotage them every chance they get. Blinken was just over there today, and as Amir said, he's asked them not to attack Iran and to strive for a ceasefire in both Hamas and Lebanon. And Amir's response to all of that was basically, please go home. And then not only that, but you probably read that Iran, or that Israel does have a plan to attack and to retaliate against Iran for what happened just a couple of weeks ago with the ballistic missiles that were lobbed into Israel, none of which have caused any damage again. So just yet another miracle. But that information was leaked by someone in the administration. And as it turns out, from what I understand, it was a woman who she's virtually a spy for Iran, and but yet had that security clearance. So whatever that this latest attack was again like every time they know ahead of time it's going to get leaked, which is why Israel did not tell the United States when they were going to when they did the attack with the pagers and the cell phones and so forth. They didn't tell them about that because they knew that would have been leaked as well, or that they knew where Nasrallah was. So they've taken out virtually all of their leaders, and I think continue to uh, to make moves in the right direction. However, and we'll see some of this tonight, and as we continue to go through, it's amazing how the world is continuing to turn against Israel. You have, for example, Macron, the president of France, who has said that they are going to uh, they're going to stop sending arms, any kind of arms support to Israel. Italy has followed suit. We know that our administration has either threatened or held back on some of the munitions. So the world is turning against Israel exactly as the Bible said. And we're seeing it up close and personal. Uh, I'm not going to go through these again because we've already done it. We've gone through this. Um, Again, this is just as a reminder that God has two distinct covenants with Israel, one of which is unilateral, unconditional, and everlasting, and covenant that God promised to make Israel a great nation, which he has done. He's established and created the nation of Israel. He promised to make uh, uh, Abraham's name great. He promised to bless Abraham. And then significantly, God promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob that he would bless those who bless them and curse those who curse them, which applies to the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So that is a promise. That is two promises that are still in play today. And we've seen throughout history that God does curse those who curse Israel. And I believe one of the reasons we're seeing all the chaos, maybe even the unbelievable storms with Helene and the other one, what was it? Milton, and other events, that it's not necessarily a coincidence. That God, I believe, is beginning to pull his hand of protection off this country. So that's an unconditional, everlasting, eternal covenant. Nothing that Israel can do can cause God to turn his back on it. And it also applies to the land of Israel. God gave Israel, the Jewish people, that land as an everlasting uh, inheritance. It belongs to them. It doesn't belong to the Palestinians. No one has a right to tell Israel what to do with that land, in spite of the fact that that's happening with great regularity and has throughout history. Then he has the Mosaic covenant, which is a bilateral covenant. That's the law, that's the Ten Commandments, and the additional commands and decrees that God issued on top of that, on top of the Ten Commandments. And again, that's bilateral. God said in places we read about it in Deuteronomy and Leviticus and other places that God will bless the Jewish people if they obey his commands and decrees. Well, we know throughout history they failed to do that. And as a result, Israel has been made to suffer various tribulations and persecutions throughout history. So we have two distinct covenants, but the significant one and the one that's still relevant today is the Abrahamic covenant, the unconditional covenant. We talked about Gog and Magog, and that is the coming invasion of Israel that is going to come from uh, a variety of directions, primarily the north, when there is a confederacy of three nations from the north, be they Turkey, Russia, and Iran, that are going to move on Israel at some point in time. And what we're seeing today is the stage, I believe, being set for that event to take place. And here's an article I came across just the other day, October 15th, and it has to do with Erdogan, the leader of Turkey, and how he's asking for an alliance with Russia, Syria, and Iran to unite against Israel. Now, you can't make this stuff up. You know, right now Russia's kind of tied up with the war in Ukraine, but here is one of the three main players of this alliance outlined specifically in Ezekiel 38 and 39 that have come together and have formed this alliance. So it goes on, and I'll just read a couple of clips from this, or a couple of sections. The Russians and the Chinese continue to strengthen ties with one another, something that the author's been anticipating for years. He says, meanwhile, and this is significant, this is important, because understand Ezekiel 38 and 39 were written 2,700 years ago. And there's no way that the prophet Ezekiel could have foreseen what we see today. We have the benefit today of being able to look back in history. Ezekiel's looking forward, and at the time he's writing this, he was, along with other Jews, in Babylonian captivity. The city of Jerusalem had been ransacked and destroyed by the Babylonians. The temple had been destroyed. So now he sees a time when Israel will be restored, Jerusalem will be restored, the temple will be rebuilt. He already covered that in precise detail in Ezekiel 36 and 37, two amazing chapters. I highly recommend you read and meditate on, because it's history written in advance is what it is. But uh, Ezekiel 38, he foresees a time when Russia, Iran, Turkey, also Sudan, and Libya form this coalition and move against Israel. And that coalition is in place today. It's just, if you go back just 20, 30 years ago, it would have been inconceivable that it could have happened. Obviously, Iran and Syria are already working closely together. but we shall see what Russia and Turkey decide to do. The Russians definitely have their hands full right now with Ukraine, and so they don't really have resources to spare for a war in the Middle East. And that's consistent, if you think about it, that statement with what we read in Ezekiel 38. Because Ezekiel 38 says God will put a hook in the jaw of Gog, the leader of Russia, and pull him and that confederacy down toward Israel. So this is going to be something at some point in time, I think in the near future, whether Gog is Putin or his successor or somebody else from Russia, that God's going to put thoughts in his head and he's going to motivate Russia along with these other nations, Iran, Turkey, and so forth, to move. So it doesn't surprise me when I read that Russians definitely have their hands full because this thought's going to be put into to his mind, and it could be motivated by. People always wonder what's the hook in the jaw that God's going to put into Gog and motivate them to come down. What's going to cause it to happen? Well, they have a very close relationship with Iran. That's, to me, very telling, with Iran providing them with weapons for the war with Ukraine and so forth. A very solid relationship with there. All three of these players, Turkey, Iran, and Russia, have a presence in Syria, which is just to the basically the north of Israel. So the stage is there. Turkey is a member of NATO, and that status would certainly be jeopardized if Erdogan decided to jump into this conflict, which he will. He ultimately will join uh, Russia and Iran in this move. Why? Because that's what the Bible says will happen. Erdogan's a bit of a nutcase. He kind of blows from pillar to post. And one day he's friends with Israel. The next day he's friends with Russia. He's a nut job. But he's also a hardline. I think he's a Shiite. Don't quote me. It could be a Sunni, but at any rate, he's of the belief that Jerusalem belongs to the Arabs, and that he is absolutely convicted on. It's on to say that for the moment, we are still waiting to see what the next big shoe, what the next big shoe will be to drop. At the time, the Russians and the Chinese continued to develop closer ties with one another. That's not tied into Ezekiel, but it is interesting because remember, Jesus said that before he comes back, there'll be wars and rumors of wars. And these will be spreading all over the world. And right now, throughout the world, with Ukraine and the potential for um, uh, China and Taiwan and China and the Philippines and World War III is constantly being bandied about. These threats of war are everywhere, probably more so than anything else. Despite all the money that we've poured into Ukraine, the Russians are winning the war. I read an article, I don't know if it was here or somewhere today, where Ukraine is literally going into restaurants and pulling young people that are not in the military out and forcing them to enlist by force. It's on video that you can see. So Ukraine is not winning this war, which raises the question: what's going on between the United States and Ukraine? And I'm not real sure. I certainly don't have an answer to that. But we continue to see things moving toward the time of Ezekiel 38 and 39. Now, um, Israel has to be in a time of peace and safety when they think at least that they're in peace and safety before that invasion can take place. The Ezekiel 30. Currently, we can't say they're in peace and safety. They're not. But there's a part of me that says, and I believe that God has interceded on their behalf throughout every battle they've been engaged in since October 7th, 2023. We've seen it up close and personal. So I think they're moving closer to that time when they think they'll be in peace and safety, which will motivate the next shoe to drop there. Going through all of these. Okay. We started the last time to take a look, and this is significant. I've got quite a bit of information. I'm probably going to spend most of tonight looking at This whole issue of globalization. Why do I say globalization? Well, let's take a look at a couple of scriptures. We looked at a couple last week or the week when we were the last time. Revelation 13 and Revelation 17, both of which make it very clear that during the tribulation, there'll be a one world government, a one world government. Now, let's take a look at Daniel chapter 7, which I think gives us a pretty good picture of what this one world government will be like. If we go to Daniel chapter 7 in verse 23 to 24 or so, I want to just read this to you. This is a prophecy. Daniel's writing this again about the same time as Ezekiel, maybe a couple of decades before or after. But in Ezekiel, or I'm sorry, Daniel chapter 7, beginning in verse 23. This is Daniel being given a description of a fourth kingdom that will come upon the earth, that will rule the earth. He's already been told that there'll be one kingdom, which will be Babylon. That Nebuchadnezzar had a dream of a statue, and the head of the statue was Babylon. The chest was the Mede Persian Empire that would succeed Babylon. The midsection was Greece, and the legs were Rome. And that's significant because those those prophecies about these coming empires were given before they actually occurred. The book of Daniel is so precise in terms of prophecy that for the longest time, people thought it had to have been written after these events took place. But one of the beauties of the Dead Sea Scrolls was that they have determined in no uncertain terms that Daniel was written before all these events that are prophesied. And I forget how many hundreds of prophecies are contained in the book of Daniel, but it's amazing. And then there's a final beast, one yet to come on the scene. And that's this 10-member nation, out of which will come a one world ruler that we know as the Antichrist. And the Antichrist is going to rule, as we see here in verse 23 of Daniel 7. He gave me, Daniel, this explanation. The he is the angel Gabriel who appeared to Daniel to interpret a dream that Daniel had. And he said, the fourth beast. Notice God refers to these various empires as beasts. Why? Because they are uh, kingdoms and world systems, and we know who the God of this world is. So these world systems are under the influence of Satan. So that's why God refers to any world body or system as a beast. So the fourth beast is a kingdom that will appear on the earth. It will be different from all the other kingdoms. It'll be different than Rome. It'll be different than Greece, different Greek Empire, than the Mede Persian Empire, the Babylonian Empire, uh, and the Egyptian Empire. It's going to be different, and it will be different from all the kingdoms, and will devour. That means just ravage what the whole earth. This has not yet occurred. So this is a prophecy about the final kingdom that's going to come during the 7 year tribulation that'll be under the rule of Antichrist. And he is going to rule with an iron fist. He's going to say, and it says that he's going to be trampling it down and crushing it. So what this says is that that his system world government, the government that he's going to rule over, is going to be very tyrannical. And we see as we go through Revelation, something like 50% of the world's population is going to die during this 7 year period. It's going to be horrible beyond horrible. And he is going to rule, and he's actually going to get to the point during the midpoint of the tribulation and toward the end of the tribulation where he is going to require that people living on the earth at that time, which will not be us, We're not here at that time. We've been raptured away. Okay, so we're in heaven with Jesus, but there are going to be people on this earth experiencing the tribulation, and people are going to be required to, as we read in Revelation 13, take the mark of the beast. Now, what is that? The mark of the beast is going to be a mark on the hand or on the forehead and the face or whatever that will identify people with the Antichrist, that shows allegiance to him. And if the person, so the beast has a lot of preview. What's that? Beast isn't around yet. No, not yet. No, it's yet to come. What we're going to talk about tonight, we're going to see how the stage is being set, how we're moving so rapidly toward that. Because when this mark is implemented, Satan's or Antichrist is not going to have a lot of time. And he's not going to have a lot of time to set up his system. Everything needs to be in place. And basically, all he's going to have to do is turn the switch and he's going to be able to control everything. That's what we're seeing happening today, the stage being set for that. So he's going to rule in a very tyrannical manner. And those that don't take the mark will likely be beheaded or executed. Some will survive, but it's going to be a pretty rough time for those that don't take the mark. And it says that if they don't take the mark, they won't be able to buy or sell. And you talk to people, and I suppose there are people that say, well, if we get to that point and what you say is true and I'm here, I just won't take the mark. Okay, well, what if you're a married man and your wife gets really sick and she needs to go to the emergency room and you don't have the mark and she can't get treated, or vice versa? What are you going to do at that point? Don't say you're not going to take the mark, because it's going to be a living hell on earth, unlike anything that we can even imagine. So we are those that are in the church, those that believe in Jesus Christ are part of the church. We are not appointed to go through. That's also the tribulation is also known or referred to in several places in the scripture as the wrath of God. And First Thessalonians chapter 5 makes it very clear we, the church, are not appointed to go through wrath. We'll talk more about that when we get to the rapture a little bit later on. Then it goes on to say the 10 horns are 10 kings that will come from this kingdom. Then another king will arise, different from the earlier ones. He will subdue three kings. So, what this says is that the world's likely going to be changed, very likely it will be changed from what it is now, with all of the nations of the world probably reconfigured into 10 regional uh, uh, governments with 10 individual leaders. And we can see that the Club of Rome, for example, a very nefarious, globalization minded group, drew a prospective new map, what they wanted to be a new map of the world back in, I think, the 70s or so, it might have been after that. But their conceived, or the map that they thought about, that they developed, had, guess how many regions? 10. So this is exactly where we're headed in some respect. And I've got an article here somewhere where behind the scenes, President Biden is advocating for creating a new region to consist of the United States, Mexico, and Canada. That well could be one of the 10 if it happens. And it kind of helps to explain this border issue too. If we merge or somehow come together with Mexico and uh, Canada, the borders will obviously be changed. So just one thought there. The 10 horns are 10 kings. So we see this new 10 kingdom, 10 member kingdom being established. And then out of that, another king will arise. So this 10 member nation needs to be in place, needs to be there. And out of that will arise the Antichrist. He'll come from among those ten nations. Everybody see that? So he will be, whether he's voted or however it is, but he's going to be after them. Another king will arise, Antichrist, uh, different from the earlier ones. He will subdue the three kings. So obviously, or apparently, there's there's three kings that are three regions that are reluctant to go along with this new world government, new world order. Remember George Walker Bush back in the 90s kept pushing for a new world order. We're going to have a new world order. Uh, Biden referred to a new world order. Obama said, what did he say? What was his promise? We were going to fundamentally change the United States. And of course, he wasn't completely successful, but he set the stage. So you've got leaders all over the place talking about this new world government. He will speak against the Most High and oppress his holy people and try to change the set times and laws. The holy people will be delivered into his hands for a times and a half time. Now, the holy people here are referred to, these are the Jewish people. These are the Jews that are alive during the second half of the tribulation. And roughly two-thirds are going to be delivered into his hands. And when it says a times, and a half a time, that's equal to 3.5 years. A time is 1 year, times is 2 years, and a half time is a half year. So that represents 3.5 years. So if you take the coming 7 year tribulation, at the midpoint of that tribulation is when this mark of the beast system will be set up, and that will last for a times and a half time. And that's when things will get really rough for Israel, which we'll talk about at a later time.
I just always wonder why it's so quickly, you know, why not just say 3.5 years?
Yeah, yeah.
Wanted to know why it doesn't just say 3.5, why it has to say,
Oh, I
a
said,
times.
oh, okay, okay. I think because that was the way it was written, it was, we didn't get into years to speak, so to speak. And a Hebrew year is 360 days, which is significant when we get to Daniel's 70 weeks. So I think that's why. That was just the way it was, what it was called in those days, as opposed to years.
But, Jesus talked in parables, so that, people would, um, the believers would eventually understand it, that those outside the church wouldn't understand it.
True.
Part of it.
Yeah, yeah.
As well, the other thing, there's some theory that the book of Revelation, they've been written that way so that Apostle John wouldn't be, whatever. It, it would be, the right wording is, but, he would get his message out without us knowing what he's going to say.
Right.
Maybe a couple of reasons. Yeah.
Yeah, very good. Okay, so that's the stage I wanted to set. And so what has to happen is that this system has to be in place when Antichrist comes on the scene. And we live in an era today, I think probably unlike any other time, when we see everything being set for the coming tribulation. And I just want to go through and just hit some highlights. I've got um, several slides here. We're going to talk about a lot of different things relative to the coming one world system. And it's interesting as you sit back and you watch what's going on, not just in the United States, but around the world today. And you come to the realization that there are some very evil forces behind what's happening. A lot of what we're seeing happening today is absolutely by design. It's not a coincidence. So I want to go through some of these things. So before we get into the meat, just some action. So what we have here is a movement toward globalization. So what do I mean by globalization? Well, for our purposes, globalization means a new world system, a new world order, a one world government that Antichrist will be able to rule the entire world from. And a lot of what we're seeing, not just in throughout the world, but in this administration as well, absolutely indicates and proves that we are headed toward this at a pretty rapid pace. And I would say, just as a start, that this election is, and I don't want to get too political here, but I've said before, I'm not voting for Kamala Harris under any conditions whatsoever. A lot of reasons for that. We'll touch on some of those. She has a Marxist background. Her father was a Marxist. She is an absolute. She's absolutely the person. In fact, Kamala Harris is the person that the globalists wanted to put in place in 2020. She was their chosen candidate because she is so radical. If she gets in, if she wins, things are going to happen in this country that are going to just move us very rapidly into this one world system. There's only one thing right now that's preventing this new one world system from taking place. And the new one world system, this new global government, is pretty complex. It has a lot of different components to it. But the only thing that's keeping it from taking place is the United States. You know, Donald Trump's a nationalist. He's not a globalist. And then many people in this country are beginning to wake up to what the globalists, the United Nations, the World Economic Forum, the Rockefellers, the Gates Foundation, all of these groups, and we'll talk a lot about this, are all about. So the only thing, the one thing that is preventing them, and they think they're so close, when I say they, the globalists, to achieving their goal, that they will do anything, in my view, to prevent it from happening. And I'm not here to say that these two assassination attempts were uh, part of the conspiracy or whatever, but it sure is interesting. Particularly when you see how he's been sued so many times. They've tried to bankrupt him, they've tried to send him to jail. They're doing anything and everything they can to keep him out of office because he's not going to go along with their plans. So uh, a lot of people that I listen to, and I don't want to get overly reactionary on this, but a lot of people say because it's not just the election, it's not just November 5th, but if he does win, he doesn't take office till January 20th. And a lot of things could happen. You know, we've got the World Economic Forum right now saying they're worried about what they call a poly crisis, many different crises taking place at the same time. The potential is there for something now, maybe not, but these guys are evil beyond evil, and um, they'll pull out all the stops. I'm afraid to say that who knows what they could do, but some of the actions that demonstrate what's been happening. This is just a sample, and we'll get into more detail in a moment. But right now, what we're seeing is collusion between the World Economic Forum, which is 1,000 different companies. Virtually every country in the world participates in the World Economic Forum, the United Nations, the World Health Organization, the International Monetary Fund. Many corporations are all in conspiring together to come up with this new system. This is all stuff you hear about the deep state, the dark state. Uh, it's all part of the dark state, the deep state that's behind the scenes, and they're in the process. And from their perspective, nothing they do is going to stop it from happening. We showed you a video a couple of weeks ago of life in China with the digital ID and the facial recognition and how they're graded upon how they support the state and they have points taken away in China if they don't adhere to the state's rules and regulations. This is already in place, and the World Economic Forum believes that China should be the model for this new one world government. Now, I'll say it right up front. This new one world government, absolutely the only option for it is to be a communist group, communist organization. That's what they're striving for. We'll talk more about that. Global instability. I have an article here, and I'm just going to read um, Prelude to the End Times. This is an article I came across back in August, and it's titled Global Instability Prelude to the End Times. Is it possible that Jesus specifically warned us about the times we are living in nearly 2,000 years ago? Think about that. What we're seeing today has been prophesied by Jesus and others in the Old Testament thousands of years ago. You may have noticed that global events have started to spiral out of control lately. Normally, the summer is a period when things are relatively quiet, and this article again was back in August. But that definitely has not been the case in 2024. According to journalist Simon Tisdall, in recent weeks we have been experiencing a peaking of volatility, instability, insecurity, unprecedented in recent times. Sudden revolutions, wars, current and imminent, terrible crimes. Think about the crime rate that's taking place, not just here, everywhere. High stakes feuding, famines, cost of living crunches, inflation, violent riots, unfathomable market panics come not as single spies, but in battalions. If we really are living in the end times, there are certain very specific signs that we should be seeing. In Matthew 24, Jesus discussed some of these signs. Chapter 6, you shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. We just talked about that. But be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass. But the end is not yet. So we see these signs of all these wars and rumors of wars, but Jesus says, you know, don't be troubled, don't be worried. These things have to happen. And basically, I think what he's telling us is for his belief for believers, he's going to keep us well in check. Nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines, pestilence. I think COVID-19. And I've got a, a slide here in a moment where the World Health Organization determined that monkeypox is a global threat, a global health threat. Now, why do I bring that up? I'll tell you when we get to it, but uh, the World Health Organization is very close to being granted authority, including by the United States, to control uh, responses to pandemics all over the world. So, in other words, if there is a pandemic that like 19 that that comes about, and this goes through and it's very close to being passed, then the World Health Organization would have taken the authority that all nations have, and they will control the response to that pandemic. And so that's why it's interesting that monkeypox, which I don't know that much about, but I think it's transmitted by sexual behavior or whatever. And it's been spreading a little bit in Africa, but they came out and declared that it's a worldwide, it's a potential to be a worldwide pandemic. If they had the authority that at the time that they're striving for now, chances are we would be under lockdown because they would have that type of authority. So,
If they declare a lockdown, they can also cancel the election.
exactly. For nation shall rise against nation. These are the beginning of sorrows, and that's a key phrase, verse 8 of Matthew 24. All of these things, the famine, the wars, the rumors of wars, the earthquakes, they're the beginning of sorrows, which is an idiom for birth pangs. And we've talked about that in this class before, but Jesus is saying when you see these things start, and it's not, I mean, there have been earthquakes throughout history. There have been pestilences and diseases and famines and wars throughout history. But when they're all coming together at one time, during one period of time, it's a convergence of everything that Jesus talked about within one period of time. Statistically impossible that everything could happen at once, and that's what we're seeing. And so what he's saying is they're like birth pains, which doesn't mean things are going to get better. What it says is just like when a woman goes into labor, the labor pains become more severe and more frequent as time goes on. And so he said, well, you begin to see these things happen, they're like a woman in labor. So these things are going to get worse and worse and worse. Just think, go back a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. Are things getting worse today than they were? Are they worse today than they were even a year ago? I think we're on the precipice, quite frankly. Um, of course, there have been wars, famines, pestilences, natural disasters all throughout human history. If we really are living in the end times, all of these elements should be occurring simultaneously, and the intensity of each element should be at a very high level. So that's what's happening. Let's talk about war, and now just a little bit about war. According to the Institute for Economics and Peace, there were 56. Did we know that? I didn't know that. Active military conflicts in the world last year, not just the ones we read about, but they're smaller ones. This was the highest numbers that we have witnessed since World War II. Ukraine, Gaza, Sudan, Ethiopia, Afghanistan, Syria, Democratic Republic of Congo, Colombia, and so on. There are data from the latest Global Peace Index produced. These are data from the local Global Peace Index produced annually by the Institute for Economics and Peace, a think tank that analyzes everything from military investment and the cost of violence to military laws and deaths in combat in 163 states and territories. So we're seeing an explosion of wars and rumors of wars virtually everywhere. Um, what else are we seeing? Um, Globalists. That's an interesting point. Another article, I'll just touch on some of the highlights of this, have entered the kill phase of the Great Reset. What's the Great Reset? That's what Klaus Schwab, the leader or the head of the World Economic Forum, is calling for. He's calling for a great reset of the world, which means a one world economic, political, cultural, and social system. That's the Great Reset. And if you go back a few years, they've since taken it down. But on the website, the World Economic website, they had something that stated they had a picture of a guy with a big smile on his face stating, "You will own nothing, but you'll be very happy." That's what they're striving for. That's what the World Economic Forum is all about. So it now makes total sense. This was a big week for the globalists. This was back in May. They feel it's their time, go time, to launch the most difficult phase of the Great Reset so they can get on with what they call the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And the Fourth Industrial Revolution has a lot to do with transhumanism, uh, making people obedient, making them subservient, having them be uh, living in what they call 15-minute cities. It's going to be total control by a few elites of virtually everybody in the world. They're desiring to shrink the middle class down so that everybody is totally dependent upon them because the poorer people are, the more malleable they are, and the more they can be controlled by the elites. Um, it's basically the dawning of a new era based on transhumanism and technocracy, something akin to what has been laid out in the novel Brave New World. But they can't get there until they reset everything, kill off the old, bring on the new. Resetting the world isn't something you can pull off by just pushing a button. It requires a series of well-designed global crises. As Schwab and his chief advisor, Yuval Noah Harari, that's one evil dude. We'll talk a little bit more about him. He's the one that says that people are uh, just what's the term he used? Can be I forget what the term is, but digitized, if you will. People can be digitized just like the internet and so forth. Um, so I'm not going to go through any more of this article, but this is just kind of a high level view of what's going to have the Great Reset. And then we have what's going on with the United Nations, as I said. The United Nations and World Economic Forum and all these other groups that are coming together. We're getting toward a cashless society. And major venues are now punishing people for using cash versus plastic. There has to be a cashless system. Once we have a cashless system, their means of controlling everything we buy and sell will be ready to be implemented. And that's central bank digital currency, another thing that is on the horizon. The United Nations is going to inspire behavior change. I won't get into that with digital IDs. They want everybody in the world to have a digital identification. Everybody. And why do they want that? So when Antichrist comes on the scene and he's controlling the whole world, everybody's in the database, everybody's in the system. It's interesting that you go back 15 years, we didn't have the technology we have today that would allow for that type of control. Well, we have it now. And I just read, and John may be a lot more in tune with this, that quantum computing, how they've just overcome one of the big barriers that will allow for quantum computing to take place, which is, I think, like 1,000 times faster than what we currently have available. The mode of change and the swiftness and artificial intelligence and all these other things are happening at a breakneck pace. So cash has got to go away. It's got to inspire behavior change. That's what the article said is UN will inspire behavior change with digital identity. What's that behavior change? It's getting people to succumb and to go along with what they say. The Canadian government warns that the country to prepare warns the country to prepare for a new virus far worse than COVID. What did they know? They had that meeting, I forget what they call it, in 2000 and 1999 or whatever it was, but Bill Gates and people from, uh, I think the World Economic Forum and some big one of the bigger hospitals in the United States got together and laid out a plan for what to do in the event that there's a worldwide coronavirus pandemic. They had this meeting ahead of the time. A couple of months later, what happens? It breaks out. So you have to ask yourself, what do they know? What are they doing? So when Canada says warning people to prepare for a new virus, what do they know? World Economic Forum warns 2024, now we're almost through with 2024, is likely to bring a catastrophic cyber event. All China has to do is pull a switch and they bring down our internet, our grid, everything in one fell swoop. It's all set up and ready to go. Could this be the latest predictive programming, simpler to Event 201? That's what I was just referring to when those folks got together. Globalist strategy. I want to go through this a little bit. And hopefully, as we go through it, there's a lot of information here. Again, we hear terms like the deep state and who's really running things. And I can tell you it wasn't Joe Biden. We know that for a fact, at least in this country. So, what is the globalist strategy and the summit for the future? What's the summit of the future? The summit of the future. Everybody familiar with the summit for the future? Anybody? It just took place in New York City the end of September. It was a 2-day meeting with 193, every nation in the world represented at this meeting. They called it the Summit for the Future, where they laid out their plan to take over control of the world. And I'll go through some of that. So the globalists believe they are very close to initiating a one world government. They think it's there. So they're thinking, well, what if Trump wins? That's really going to set us back. We got to do something, God forbid, to make sure that doesn't happen. So they're trying to make an example out of him. And also, with everything that's happened to him with the lawsuits and the criminal charges and trying to just totally destroy him, basically it's a message to us too. If they can bring him down, they can bring us down. So who are the committed globalists? Who are they? Or I've referred to them as Luciferians. I get that term from a prophecy teacher I listened to, a guy by the name of J.B. Uh, last name escapes me right now, but he's written several books on the Luciferian conspiracy, which basically is you have several elites that are under the control of Lucifer, of Satan himself, that are controlling and trying to take over things. So, who are these committed globalists? Because it's not just the governments. Governments alone can't do it. They don't have the funding. So, they need support from corporations. So, the globalists, some of them are the World Economic Forum, Bill Gates, big time enemy of the people, I'm telling you. George Soros, we've all heard that name. Yuval Noah Harari, we just talked about him. Justin Trudeau, the leader of Canada. He's a big time member of the World Economic Forum and he is an absolute Marxist. Most of the Biden administration, the Rockefeller, Carnegie, Ford consortium. I'll talk a little bit about the Rockefellers later. Very powerful group, as these others are as well. Various leaders of the United Nations and the World Health Organizations, leaders of the EU, the leader or the woman who is in charge of the central bank of the European Union, big time World Economic Forum member. She's there at every meeting. World Economic Forum, they get together once a year in Davos, Switzerland to plan out their strategy going forward. The Bilderberg Group, the Trilateral Commission, the Council of Foreign Relations, some of the central bankers throughout the world are members of this group. The bulk of TV and social media magnates. You know, we just heard about what went on with CBS in that interview of Kamala Harris, how they took out one of her statements that made no sense and inserted another one. They got caught. That's because they're part of this global elite group. Much of our education establishment, look at the National Education Association and how vile that has become and what they're doing to our kids. Excuse me. Certain institutional investment groups, BlackRock. Anybody familiar with BlackRock? Huge group with $10 trillion under management. Larry Fink is the head of BlackRock. And BlackRock is the group that bought up all the real estate and they're buying it, owning it, and renting out thousands and thousands of homes because they don't want people to own. They want people to rent. So they're part of it, as is State Street, Vanguard. Numerous religious leaders. Guess who is right at the top of the heap? Pope Francis himself, big time globalist, including some of the World Council of Churches. They're networking. These groups are all networking together. How they do it and how they keep themselves under wraps, I don't know. The future the future of the global, UN 2.0. So this just gets into um, the meeting I was talking about that just took place in September, the path to the future. And we'll get more involved in that. But just by way of, I'll just hit some of the highlights of this article. But it was a UN meeting entitled Summit of or for the Future. That was the title of this meeting, been planned for months. And it was in New York City, or Path to the Future. That's remember when Bibi Netanyahu spoke in front of the UN a couple of weeks ago? That's what it was. They allowed him to speak during this meeting. Path to the Future took place in New York City the end of September, was attended by 179 member nations at the UN headquarters in New York City. It was all about global government, just as the Bible predicts. It was a foreshadowing of the time we just talked about when Antichrist will control all commerce in the world. So let me just hit some of the highlights of this article. This actually came out before the Summit of the Future, and it's entitled The Future of Global Governments, UN 2.0. You see, the UN was established to create and to maintain peace throughout the world. Or, as we'll see in another slide, so we thought. And like like my friend JD says, not everything you say, nothing you see is as it is. So that organization, as the World Economic Forum, is far from a peacekeeping group. The UN wants much more control over global affairs, and the Pact for the Future, again, just held in September, which was, and goes back to September 10th, is scheduled to be adopted during the Summit of the Future that will be held September 22nd and 23rd, will go a long way toward making the one world system a reality. But even though the Summit of the Future is just jays away, hardly anyone is talking about it, and the mainstream media is almost entirely ignoring it. It's not surprising to me that none of you really had heard about this, but it was a huge deal. Trust me. Enormous decisions that could dramatically affect the future of everyone on the entire planet are about to be made, and just about the entire population has absolutely no idea what's going on. That's the way they operate. It's all behind the scenes. This is exactly how the globalists like it. They don't want the general population to even be aware of their agenda as they relentlessly push it forward. According to the UN official website, the idea for the Summit of the Future was conceived at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic 4 years ago. This was the beginning of a process that would eventually lead 4 years later to the convening of the Summit of the Future, a major event this September, which will take place at UN headquarters just before the annual high level debate of the General Assembly. It all sounds very nice until you start digging into the details. There's a special page for the Summit of the Future on the UN website, and it tells us that this summit will be a quote, once in a generation opportunity to do what? Create a new international consensus. It's a high level event bringing world leaders together to forge a new international consensus on how we, the United Nations, deliver a better present and safeguard the future. Let me tell you a little secret about the UN. Um, and I have it recorded somewhere, but one question that Kamala was asked quite a while ago about the border, why it's happening and so forth, she basically said, and I'm paraphrasing, that we have given control of that to the United Nations. So why? Why would you do that? Why would you give control of our borders to the United Nations? Have we heard about that in the news? No. But that's the way. And trust me, there are people in this administration that are uh, part of this global movement. Exactly what do they hope to achieve? Well, the UN says the Summit of the Future will focus on five primary areas. A digital future for all youth and future generations. And that's one of the things that was passed at this meeting was a digital plan for the entire world, to digitize the entire world. It's actually been approved. On the second page of the PDF, there's a section entitled Transforming Global Governments. This is part of what they talked about at the Summit of the Future. Contains some very alarming plans for a far stronger UN than we have today. Um, so pretty serious stuff. And I'm just going to go to this next slide and try to get through it. So here's just a brief history of the United Nations. As I said, its purpose was to maintain world peace. It was established in 1948 or so, and it was after World War II and designed to do that, or so we thought. So here's some interesting background. Among the globalists who are associated with the UN is the Club of Rome. Anybody hear about the Club of Rome? Yeah. So uh, it was formed roughly it was in 1991. The Club of Rome, which was kind of a foreshadow or a predecessor to the World Economic Forum, it published its first public document entitled, this is what they said in 1991, quote, Club of Rome, first global document. In that document was the following quote, in searching for a common enemy against whom we can unite, we came up with the idea that pollution, interesting. They came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, would fit the bill. All these dangers are caused by human intervention. It's a made up uh, uh, idea. Global warming was made up, and it goes all the way back. I've got another quote I'll read you a little later from Karl Marx, who basically said the same thing. Uh, Caused by human intervention and natural processes. And it's only through changed attitudes and behaviors they can be overcome. So they said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to focus on the climate. And it's changing due to human intervention. Now, why would they do that? It's not about the environment, it's about control. And part of the environmental movement is brand new taxes, income taxes, global taxes, carbon taxes, controlling how far we drive, controlling what we drive, controlling what we eat. No more meat. And interesting, First Timothy chapter 4 says that they will not allow them to eat meat. That's one of the things they want to curb. They want to curb us from eating meat because the meat that we buy uh, exudes or it has a fluctuance that is methane and hurts the environment. It's like, what are you talking about? So it was made up. The UN believes it needs to be the center of everything, the economy, politics, government, religion, sustainable development. We'll talk about that next week. Is the ideology that currently underpins it all. They have 17 what they call sustainable goals that they want to achieve by the year 2030. And it's education, which is propaganda. It's equity, which is uh, everybody has the same opportunity. Not equality, which is based on merit. It's equity based on outcomes. That's why you hear Kamala saying that, you know, I believe in equality, but there are many people that don't have the opportunities, and we need to be able to spread around the wealth, redistribution of wealth. That's socialism 101. Um, it began with Agenda 21, and then Agenda 21 was later updated to Agenda 2030. And Agenda 21 was drafted in 1992. And here's what UN Secretary General at the time stated, and we'll finish with this. Quote, it is clear that current lifestyles and consumption patterns, what we consume, of the affluent middle class, involving high meat intake consumption of large amounts of frozen and convenience foods, ownerships of motor vehicles, numerous electrical appliances, home and workplace air conditioning, expensive suburban housing are not sustainable. This is 1992. So what we're seeing today isn't something that just popped up overnight. It's been in the works for 50, 100, 150 years. And they're reaching the point, and I'll just point out that the one piece of evidence that I think really supports that they've been doing this for a long time is what's happening to our kids in school. You look at millennials, that for the most part, their entire school experience, for not every one of them, they had home schools and private schools and so forth, but for those that went through the public system, have been indoctrinated and propagandized their entire lives to the point today where 40, 50% of them are willing to try socialism. That's where they are. And they've been at this for a long period of time. Let me tell you about socialism, and I'll quit with this. Socialism only works as long as they have other people's money to spend. Margaret Thatcher. But the elitists, the globalists, those in charge would never give up, even though they run out of funding, which means that it becomes communism. Socialism always leads to communism. And we'll talk more about that next week. So, a lot of this background, but hopefully, we're beginning to see that that what we're watching is the coming together of this strategy that these globalists have in place to bring us to that one world system, the new world order. That's what it's all about. It's what all these people are up to. And so much progress has been made, and they're right there. All I can say is watch out for the next couple of weeks. I'm a little concerned of what might happen over the next couple of weeks. Like Stan was saying, they could declare martial law for some reason. Who knows? But we need to pray. And I will say this, and I'll finish with this, that there are something like 20 some odd governors, I believe it is, red state governors that now understand what's going on and are pushing back against this movement with the UN, the World Economic Forum. There are those in Congress, there's bills before the House, and there's a bill before the Senate, both designed to curb the control they're trying to gain. If the Democrats take over, though, forget about it. It's over.
You're trying to get the Speaker of the House out.
Mhm.
Can you?
Questions, comments?
Just the,
Shows, can you, email
Pardon me?
all that stuff you showed us? Can you email it to us?
Sure.
Yeah, 'cause there-
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think we just have to focus on the Lord's in charge. So whoever gets whatever our situation is, we know that the Lord is.
And that's the key. Jesus is in control. You know, he's got to, at some point in time, he has to judge unrepentant sin, and he's got business to attend to as far as Israel's concerned. And we're at that point. We're there. And it's just amazing to me how we're watching so many things. But he's in charge, he's in control. Like I said earlier, we don't need to worry, we don't need to fear. Doesn't mean that we're not going to go through a little something before the rapture. I'm convinced it's not going to be all that bad, but we don't know for sure. But he's in charge.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've seen him judge Israel for obedience, and he won't do that to them and not someone else. So
Right.
Christians who should be calling on his name and following through,
Exactly.
if we don't, and we let that down, just as you pointed out, I think you or somebody else, that 45% of evangelistic Christians did not vote the last time.
Right.
And that would have changed the outcome, and Trump would have been in. But
Right.
Christians fell down.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of fear it's going to
we're
happen.
liable to be punished for that.
Yeah. And there's a lot of fear that's going to happen again. Because there's Christians that say it just doesn't matter. And it does matter.
They say the strongest Christians are those who have the greatest persecution,
Mhm.
and we have not had enough.
Right.
So we may need to join the ranks of those in China and UK. I mean,
Right.
Russia.
I know there's Christians that are gonna vote for that lady.
You what?
I know Christians that who are gonna vote for that lady.
Yeah,
Whatever her name is. Yes.
that's kind of amazing to me. That's right.
I mean, if they don't get it.
Bob,
Says.
Rick's been trying to get you there for half an hour. I don't know how you don't miss that tonight.
Well, I mean,
I really feel bad for him.
all right, Rick. Boy.
I saw a video clip where at a Kamala Harris rally, someone shouted out, "Jesus Christ is Lord,"
Yeah.
and then she said, "You're at the wrong rally."
Yeah, right.
Then they tried to doctor it up by making it sound like the guy said lies, lies, lies. But there was a lady right there that said that's not what he said. He said Jesus is Lord. She says you're at the wrong rally.
Mhm.
Yeah.
She's very evil.
Y'all know about the evangelical singers? What? She think they're using Franklin Grant's, Philip Grant picture on brochures for Harris saying evangelical singers.
Yeah, she.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you imagine her? I don't want to get too much, but can you imagine her going up against China, or Putin? And I would say one other thing. She recently, when she was doing that 60 Minutes thing, she had, or um, the narrator, the guy was asked her about Bibi Netanyahu. Do we have a good relationship with Bibi Netanyahu? Her response was, the more important question is, do the American people have a good relationship with the Israelis? And she says, we do. She wouldn't answer that question. 73% of the people in Israel voted for Bibi Netanyahu. He is the prime minister. They support everything he's done and is doing. And I will say this as well. If this nation, and that's why we as believers, I think, my view, my admonition is we need to stand up for Israel. We need to do that. They're God's chosen people, and He has a plan for them. If we're not going to stand up for Israel, I think we might have to answer for that someday, you know. But that's our responsibility. And so God says He's going to curse those who curse them. And if this nation continues to curse Israel, it's in serious, and I think it's in serious trouble already because of what's happened. Okay. All right. Father, we just thank you for this time. And Lord, it's so uplifting to be able to come together and to share your word and to come to a deeper understanding and just see how your word written thousands of years ago mirrors so much that's happening throughout the world today, not just in this country, but throughout the world. This world is teetering, Lord, but it tells us that your return is so close, and we just, Lord, stand on your promise not to take any anxious thoughts, to put our faith and to walk with you, to look up for our redemption draws near. And we just thank you for that. I pray for everyone here, Lord, and those that are listening in. Lord, we ask that you bring us back safely next week and just ask that you be with us in Jesus' name. Amen.